Have to make a video because I said I would. Old poems. Poems that I have to qualify and contextualize, or I'll feel like I'm peddling lies to the children. I have to read Man Oh Man, but if I read that, I'll feel like I have to read I'm Not a Liberal. I'll have to read Anthem, but if I read that, I have to read Morbid. But if I read those, I have to tell stories that I never tell, or talk around the things I refuse to say, which will always leave me feeling like I've left out vital things and been misleading. Litanies. I have to read chapter 2 of Dworkin's Right Wing Women, thinking I should do that instead of story time. The litany of employer abuses is simply too long. It's also painful, but that is not permitted to silence me, ever. It's just that painfully long videos of stories no one was asking for will be unhelpful, because they will be unheard, unhearable. The more I thought about it, summoning those stories just to remember them clearly, fully, chronologically, I was blown away by how unbelievably horrible each instance was. Altogether, spoken out loud, they would ever be abridged, even in focus. And they are not the focus, but one potent thread of the story, a story that is no one's business. Maybe the business. Maybe everyone's problem. It's loaded. So, this is a little channel update. Um, sorry, I got my cat Eeping in the background. Hi, baby, it's okay. Um, so, I said that I was going to read a poem, so I have to read the poem. And I'm gonna. But first I have to make this little video because I'm going to read a bunch of poems. And I'm going to try to keep things going every Sunday. Um, we'll see how that goes. I mean, I've probably written enough poems to read every Sunday for the rest of my days, but we'll see. I'm not going to stop writing. but I do have to read some old stuff, so I do have to contextualize those a little bit. And one of them was a story that I was reading Derek Jensen and Stephanie McMillan's The Knitting Circle Rapist Annihilation Squad. Wonderful book. Buy it, please. Read it yourself if, you know, you don't have your bifocals on. I read it, but I also tell a little story in there. And I said, while I was telling that story, that I would eventually put the poem up, and I was like, oh, hell, now I gotta do that. So the story's in there. I'm not going to tell that story again. I'm just going to read the poem. But that means that I have to read all this other stuff, and I will tell a little story right here about Anthem and Morbid. And so Anthem I wrote when I was like 19, 20, 21, something. I was a baby. And I was really feeling it, and it was a very hopeful poem, and I stand by a lot of it. I mean, it's a little bit self-aggrandizing, a little bit messianic for my taste now, but the heart of it, the connective tissue of it, I still feel and I still stand by. But I remember it was many years later, it was probably like over a decade later, and I was at this party, and I wasn't being the hyper interactive person that wrote Anthem. You know, I grew up being the kind of person who, I don't know, just kind of instinctively understood that I was a social creature, and I felt that it was a matter of honor, not, you know, also obligation, being socialized all female, but also just a matter of honor, of being a good person, that you always do your best, always, and that you always muster for people. You know, it doesn't matter how bad your day is. No one cares how bad your day is. It doesn't matter how tired you are. It doesn't matter, you know, what you all been through in life. It's you bring your best to everyone all the time. And so I was just the kind of person that if I saw you in the street, it didn't matter how many people there were in the street. It didn't matter what time of day it was. You know, I would look you in the eyes, and I would smile at you, and I would say hi, you know, or whatever else we could manage before we passed ways. And, you know, I was devout, man. I really never wanted to give that up. I wanted to be the change and be the kind of person who would change the world. And it's not that I've entirely given up on that, but there's only so many decades of doing that that you can do while being female in this world. And so I was at this party one time where somebody felt that I owed them more than I was giving them. And they muttered this thing that got to me, and it made me feel like, like I was being called out. They were like, "Do you practice what you preach, girl?" And they weren't even saying it to me directly, but it felt like that. Sometimes somebody will just say something snide, and you're like, "Hey, what?" And I felt that. And not too long before that, I had written this poem called Morbid. That probably didn't get out into the world as much as Anthem did, and I felt like he was trying to call me out for Anthem, like, "Oh, you're all this idealist, but can you live up to it?" And I sure did try. I really did. But I live in this world. And so I am the person who wrote Anthem, but I'm also the person who wrote Morbid. And so I never wanted to read Morbid again in my life. There's a lot of things that I just am not going to talk about with anyone ever. But there are some things that I do feel obligated to talk about to pay it forward. The more we share our stories, the more we ante up, the better all of our lives are going to be. And so I muster. And I'm an actress, retired actress now, I guess. But I was an actress for a long time, and for one of the plays, it was a collaborative work. I offered up this poem. I was like, we could put this in the play because it seemed like it fit, and it was accepted by my peers. And so I had to read this freaking poem, for all the rehearsals. And it's not a terrible task for me to memorize poems, but memorization is a thing. It's a job. It's work, and so you have to work to do it. It doesn't just automatically happen. And at least for me, I don't have a perfect photographic memory. Memory is okay, but it's not photographic. So I did have to go through the trouble of memorizing this poem, and then I had to go, rehearse it, and then I had to recite it in front of an audience because I was a theater actress, and so I had to recite it in front of a live audience for all the plays and then the matinee, and I had some distance on it. It wasn't like at that time I hadn't broken on through to the other side yet. I wasn't a big public spectacle like I am now. I didn't cry at the drop of a pin. I had cultivated a numbness and a distance where I could write things down and I could recite them, and it was fine. It didn't really touch me. But then one night, I was reading this poem on stage, and it got to me, man. It got to me. Sometimes, if you're a performer of any kind, what it's like when you're up in front of people. There's a feedback. You're not alone just projecting out into the world like on YouTube. People are giving you energy back. They're impacting who you are, how you feel, what you're doing. There's an exchange, and there was just something about the exchange that snapped me out of it. And all of a sudden I just was totally emotionally naked. No numbness, no buffer, nothing. And I had to be in my body in this poem. Man, I was like, well, I'm done with that. I just never, ever, ever wanted to read it aloud again. And I was shocked that I ever had, and that I had ever, anteed up this much. But I really, going back to this little journal entry that I read here, I really can't read Anthem and put that out into the world as if it can stand alone. Because it can't. You need both sides. And so I'm going to do both. And I just want you to know that it's going to suck for me. This will be the first time that I've read Morbid since that incident. to like allowed, and that was over 10 years ago now. So you're welcome. Also, I'm still gonna do the Dworkin stuff. I know I haven't done that yet. I haven't gotten around to reading Mercy the second time yet, but I'm gonna do it. I said I would, and I will. But I have some other stuff of mine to read first, so I'm gonna do that too. And when it comes to this other stuff, I'm gonna end up talking about some things that I've probably talked about a little bit before, but I'm gonna talk about them more. That said, I need to make a couple of disclaimers. One of them is drugs are fun, drugs are bad for your health, use discernment. You know, if I had my way, there wouldn't be farmies in the world. We would be, you know, all learning herbology from the grandmothers, and that would be that. But we don't live in that kind of world, and we don't have well understood mass acts of integrated rites of passage. You know, so there's kind of like an obligatory experimentation phase that a lot of people go through, and I went through that, and I don't regret it. I don't regret it a bit. I think of like Bill Hicks, like, well, I did drugs and I had a really good time, you know. Well, I did mushrooms and I went to Astro World and I had a really bad time. It's like, well, go to nature. Like, you know, there are some things that I don't recommend that you should not do, but there are some things that I think, well, you know, like I don't even take aspirin. You know, I'm just that kind of person. I'm not into numbing my experience. I feel like that is dishonorable behavior. It's also terrible for your kidneys and your livers. You gotta be careful with your body. You have to honor your temple. But no one else is the boss of that. You know, you gotta decide that for yourself. It's not up to me, it's not up to anybody else. You do you all day. Hopefully that's enough about that. You know, I mean, alcohol is straight poison. If you're not making tinctures, I don't see a good reason to be doing that. But anyway, moving on to the next one, the hard one, is suicide. I do talk about people that I know who I've loved who've gone that way. And that's nobody else's business but theirs. You know, that wasn't up to me. They made a choice. They were in pain and they wanted the pain to stop, and they stopped it. And I respect that decision. And it's, you know, it's something that a lot of people have considered. I figure like in the absence of real rites of passage, most people consider it. And I know I have. And I talk about it, and I'm not ashamed of it. I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. But I also want to put out there in the world that I am not suicidal. I have a wonderful life. I have lots of love in my life, and I want to be there for the people that I love. I have cats, you know. I got to stick around for my cats. I got friends. I got to stick around for my friends. I got a family, you know. I'm not going anywhere. If anything happens to me, you know, it wasn't me. We'll find some wood and knock on it. Good Lord. Alright, well, enough of that. I'm gonna put this up and then get back to reading poetry, which is what I prefer to do. Thank you all for sticking around. Thank you for listening to poetry. Thank you for listening to books being read and snippets of other people's work. I really feel like it does a lot of good in this world, and I want to continue to be a part of that for as long as humanly possible. All right, I hope you're all well in every way that you can be, and that you feel the love